Hello, YouTube, and everyone watching at home on the VOD. This is your humble host, Mr. Shintigercurl, that dude in the straw hat, saying, "How everybody doing?" I see brother Hairball in the chat. What's going on, brother? After a long hiatus, I am back, doing what I do best, streaming some good streams for you folks. How's everybody doing? It took a long hiatus, but now I feel it's time for me to make my return. Especially since I've made a bit of a name for myself on Blue Sky. If you haven't signed up for Blue Sky, hit Blue Sky up because it's like Twitter, except ran less by a piece of shit autocrat. Oh, LPH, good to see you, man. How's it going? Now, tonight, we're going to be doing some reading from some Warmachine lore, specifically about pirates. But before we do that, it's time to get out your guns, lock and load, and it's time to shoot the shit. Oh, and congratulations, brother Ball. You got yourself a date. Okay, good on you. Hope it goes out well. Let me just change the music out real quick because that's not the music I want in this. Let's see. Actually, some music that I want to different sort of music that I downloaded for this. All right. And where is it? There we go. And into some, yeah, that's Marvel vs. Capcom 3 in the background. Yeah, that's good. That's good. Just the levels? All right, that's good. All right. If you're not familiar with this is the STS, Shooting the Shit. It was where we just talk about random topics that I find particularly interesting that happened in the week. And because a lot has happened since the last time we interacted with each other, I'm not going to go too far into this, mostly because if I talk about every topic that happened between the last time I streamed and now, we will be here all week. But I'm just going to talk about the most pertinent things, one of them being that this is WrestleMania week. That's right. This week, WrestleMania. Let's see. And I love how Randy made a reference a couple of years ago when he over. Okay, that's pretty cool. That's pretty cool. So anyway, it's WrestleMania week, and I for one will not be watching, not because of the fact that Triple H has been saying some rather questionable things, especially when it concerns our not so honorable head of state, Mr. Donald Bastard Trump, but because the build has just been bad. Like, I've never seen a weaker build for a Mania in my life. I know the old saying goes that if there's a weak build, the show's going to be great. It's just there's nothing for me to watch. I mean, outside of the real main event of Cody versus Cena, there's really nothing on this card that really interests me. I don't care about the women's tag team titles. The fatal four-way for the Intercontinental title just seems slapped together and miscast. The triple threat for the women seems underappreciated and underexposed due to just the talent of the women. I don't care for anything that Logan Paul has to do. Don't get me wrong, Logan Paul is a fantastic wrestler. He's just a shit human being, even if his dance partner is one of the greatest to ever do it, AJ Styles. I'm kind of interested in the whole Jay versus Gunther thing, but the fact that they're being put in the middle of the card instead of in one of the main event positions, it's disrespectful to Jay, disrespectful to Gunther, and just a slap in the face of the fans. And of course, like, we got to talk about the supposed greatest triple threat in the history of wrestling: Rollins versus Roman versus Punk. This seemed like a main event for one of the B or C shows, like it should be like one of the B or C shows, like Bad Blood or Roadblock or Backlash or something like that. It's not a WrestleMania main event worthy triple threat. There's nothing on the line. There's nothing on the line. It's just there. It's just because Punk, Rollins, and Roman are doing nothing. They just had to slap together a feud, and then they basically made this match Not even SummerSlam LPH. I've seen some great SummerSlam main events. This wouldn't even be qualify as a main event for a SummerSlam. That's why I said a B level pay-per-view, not one of the big four. And now it just seems like it's devolving into who wants Paul Heyman the worst. Like, why not just go the full route? Go the full Russo route and have the match be a Paul Heyman on a pole match. You did it for Judy Bagwell. Might as well do it for Paul Heyman. Yeah, like I said, I am not interested in this. I am so not interested in this Mania. I could not be less interested in this Mania. My best friend is going to be in Las Vegas just because, but I told him, no, don't go to the show, even though he can't afford it because the tickets are way too high. Just, But on the brighter side, tomorrow night we got some history being made. And a certain sleazy Eric Bischoff is not going to be happy. Why? Because tomorrow night, AEW Dynamite will break the record for longest continuous running wrestling program on TBS. Officially dethroning WCW Nitro. That's right. Tomorrow night, Dynamite would have been around longer than friggin' Nitro. So many people back then have said that AEW wouldn't make it past to this point. It'd be folded in under a year, and now look at them. And it's doubly worse. It's doubly bad because Bischoff has been shitting on AEW for years since they wouldn't give him a job. Yeah, like they didn't want to get his grip. Like they know the last company he was a part of, he nearly put out of business. I'm looking at you, TNA. So I can't say for certain. Well, I'm sorry, I'm a bit distracted here. But yeah, it's gonna be a great show, LPH. I mean, you got Owen Hart, you got the Owen Hart tournament ripping its way through the next couple of months. We got the Ops eventually going to become the new Trios champions because Pac unfortunately got injured at last week's show. He jacked up his leg. I don't know the severity of the injury. And most of all, we got a dream match on our hands as the CEO, Mercedes Moné, will take on the forever champion of ROH, Athena. People have been thirsty for this match since Mercedes joined up, and now she's got 4 belts on her. And she's facing off against possibly the longest reigning champion in ROH history. She's the longest reigning women's champion in ROH history by a long mile. At least it's more hit than misses, at least for me. But I can understand why you're saying that, LPH. That's okay. See, I got that from Blue Sky. Blue Sky is a very welcoming place for AEW fans. It's about the only place on the internet that you can get legitimate discussions about pro wrestling without it devolving into mindless tribalisms. Hello, Devil. Welcome. Glad you could be here. Athena wins a rewrite. I really don't care who wins this match. I'm going to just enjoy it because both women have just been on an absolute tear. Mercedes has had a shaky start when she first joined, especially with that match with Britt Baker, which wasn't her best. But once she found her groove, she's been just hitting it out of the park, especially that second match she had against Chris Statlander, which I call the greatest women's match I've ever seen. Yeah, I said it. Mercedes Moné versus Chris Statlander 2 is the best women's match I've ever seen, period. And now we got 2 women who are at the top of their games, dominating the women's division. One of them dominating the women's division, and they're in a tournament to figure out who will face off against Timeless Tony Storm at All In Texas this year. And of course, hopefully, Tony Storm will be on commentary because Tony Storm is just when you think there isn't anything this woman can't do, her commentary skills are just excellent. I'm loving it. So much looking forward to this week. And of course, you're going to find some people that are going to try to tear AEW down and griff on them for no reason. Now, don't get me wrong, AEW is not perfect. I have been critical of them on Blue Sky, especially after Dynasty. I was really pissed off at the end of that show, but now after having let it marinate and seeing where things are going, I'm interested. The ending still left me a little bit sour, but I was nowhere near as mad as I was directly afterwards. So I'm kind of okay with that. And the places they're going, I mean, last week was just a tour de force of storytelling, as we just had story after story after story after story after story, just interweaving and connecting with each other. There's just like, it's like two different sides of a coin. With WWE, there's a little bit of good in there that I want to see, but there's just too much crap in there for me to sit through. The opposite is true with AEW. There's a lot that I want to see. There's a lot of stuff there's a lot of good, but just a little bit of stuff that I don't want to see. Like I'm getting burnt. I was burnt out with the whole Death Rider thing. Oh, yeah, that's right. Tomorrow night, the last first round match of the Owen Hart men's side tournament. And it'll be everybody's favorite Gardner, Hangman Adam Page versus a wild card opponent. Who is the wild card? But I know for certainty who that is. The wild card he will be Hangman Adam Page will be facing tomorrow night will be none other than, you guessed it, Frank Stallone. I've been making that joke on Blue Sky all the time. It just cracks people up. There you go. Yep, that's right. Thank you, Hairball, for figuring that out. Also, a lot of stuff going on overseas. I don't want to really talk about what's going on over here because that is depressing, and I don't want to really think about it. But one of the good things happening in the world, Johnny Somali. More new charges added up to the many charges for the things he did over in South Korea. Eddie says that his recovery is going well, but he's just having a medical concern came up that wasn't apparent during his physical rehab, which he's doing under Cesar Bononi. Cesar Bononi, amazing guy. Also says that he is also dealing with some mental and emotional stuff. You know how that is. So it's not likely that he'll be coming back much too soon until he gets this stuff done with. So, but we miss our Mad King. As I was saying, Johnny Somali is facing more new charges, and right now, as of this recording, he is currently still stuck in Korea, and and based on on some of these new charges, he will be seeing jail time. Specifically because of some charges brought upon by when he went to a amusement park and was playing some rather inappropriate music around minors, which is a very big no-no in South Korea, and he really thinks that he's going to get off with a slap on the wrist. But no, because like I said, one of the charges is mandatory jail time, and because he pled guilty to his first set of charges during his first appearance in court last month, he is technically a convicted felon in South Korea, so that is not helping his case. So it's not a matter of how much jail time he will be seeing. I mean, it's a question of how much jail time he's seeing, but not if he's going to jail. But he's definitely going to jail, and he knows this. Speaking of somebody who's of another nuisance streamer that's going to jail, Vitaly played the FOFA game. He fucked around, and now he's in the find out part as he went to the Philippines and decided to just be an absolute jackass. For those who don't know, he is a pioneer in modern day YouTubing, and was legitimately a somewhat great streamer. And now he went into nuisance streaming. He just basically went around the Philippines, the Philippine capital, and just bothered people, stole a police officer's motorcycle, and threatening to beat up and did ran into Johnny's City of the Wolves joke. I wish. But yeah, Vitaly was immediately arrested, and the Philippine government is not playing around. Like, after he was arrested, he was not given bond or anything like that. He was literally perp walked in front of the national media handcuffed. And the chief police at the time just said, okay, we're sick and tired of these fucking nuisance streamers. We're gonna make an example out of him. All while he's just standing there trying to look nonplussed. Hell, the president of the Philippines personally made a statement saying that they're sick and tired of these fucking nuisance streamers mocking their culture, and they are going to make an example out of Vitaly. And excuse me. And we saw one of a YouTuber showed off where Vitaly will be staying while he is in the Philippines, serving a rather supposedly lengthy sentence of nearly 20 years, based on what I'm reading. And let's just say, I'd rather go to Attica than stay there. That place is a nightmare, and he's not. It would not surprise me by the end of this year. Yeah, exactly. Screw those guys. So where Vitaly's going to be spending his time in a Filipino prison, death is preferable. I'm not going to go into details, but let's just say I'd rather take the death penalty than just stay there. So I would feel bad for him, but he made his bed. Now he's got to sleep in it. Let's see. In manga news, today marks the 5th time in my long career as a manga reader that I rage quit a manga. That's right, I rage quit. I couldn't do it anymore. The manga in question is called Medaka is Impervious to My Charms. That's not the full title, that's just the title that I remember. It's a slice of life romance, high school romance comedy, or romance manga. It's about a girl who is like really pretty, and how everybody loves her except this one guy who strives to be a monk, and she spends most of the manga trying to get him to fall in love with her, but she instead falls in love with him. And then all of a sudden, all these girls, like literally like 4 or 5 girls, all fall in love with this guy, but he is so completely oblivious and so awkward in social situations that he can't imagine that these girls will be interested in him in that way. And it is just a slog to get through. Like, it is a slog. Like, last chapter, the main girl actually confessed that she loved him, but then she took it right back the next chapter, and I'm like, that's it, I'm done. I can't read this shit no more. I cannot do this. I cannot. Yeah, the story, the blue balls was intense for this one. Like, it's rare for me to rage quit a manga, but this is the one that made me do it, because if you want to read there are tons of romance mangas I'm reading right now. The Flower That Blooms with Dignity, Horimiya. Let's see, what else is a good romance novel? Hima 10. Hima 10 is a fantastic romance novel, romance manga. It is great. It is really great. Like, you got this guy who is a professional, is a high school student, but he's a professional housekeeper, and so he offers to clean up the house of a new girl who happens to be the CEO of a major makeup company in Japan, but is also an idol of sorts, and they kind of get to know each other. But on the other hand, he's in love with his childhood friend, and he wants to confess to her. And on the other hand, one of the girls, the CEO girl's friends who works for her company, comes in, and she starts to have feelings for him. But here's the thing, all 3 of these girls are so well written and so likable that I can't really pick one for him to go. I mean, he has chemistry with all 3 of them. Like, he has real chemistry with them, and they like him for a legitimately good reason. He is a nice, dependable guy who just does things out of the kindness of his heart. He is somewhat good looking, and unlike our previous protagonist, Medaka, whatever the fuck his name was, he's not oblivious. Like, he knows he's surrounded by all these lovely women, and he knows that they might be interested in him, but he has his own taste and what have you. And the main girl that they talk about in the manga, she just like, I like his company. And in the new chapter, she just realized, I think I might have a crush on him. Like, she comes to depend on him and like him as a person for being there for her, for cooking and cleaning and all this other stuff, and it's just, I just like it. It's a great little manga that really makes it hard for me to say, oh, he should be with this girl. No, he should be with this girl. Like, why did you make all these girls so damn interesting? So there's that. Two more things I actually wanted to talk about concerning some live action stuff that's going down. In a recent interview, the actor who is going to be playing Johnny Storm in the new Fantastic Four movie, The Fantastic Four First Steps, says that he will be playing Johnny Storm completely different from what we expect. Johnny Storm will no longer be the immature, womanizing prankster that we know and love from the comics and the various movies, and he'll be more sensitive and more caring about other people's feelings, i.e., he won't be fighting with Ben. Speaking as somebody who has been a fan of the Fantastic Four since I was like 5 years old, the very first comic book I ever read was an issue of Fantastic Four. And I know how these characters are supposed to be. Johnny is supposed to be an immature, womanizing dickhole that everybody respects and loves. This is not how you're supposed to play him. Like, no, I do not accept that. I do not accept that. Characters are supposed to have flaws. I mean, I'm shocked too. Why would you make Johnny Storm like that? That's not Johnny Storm. I don't know who that is going to be on my screen, but that's not Jonathan and Frank, not Jonathan Storm. And him not fighting with Ben, no. This makes me wish for the days of Chris Evans as Johnny Storm. And if you saw Deadpool and Wolverine, he still has that snark in him. Yeah, because that screams that whole scene, that whole segment that he was in Deadpool and Wolverine, that was Johnny Storm. Utterly, completely. That's my Johnny Storm. I don't know who this is going to be, but it's not my Johnny Storm. And I just realized I've heard of some news coming out about the actress who's going to be playing Toph in the second season of the live action Avatar. And she says that she is going to play Toph more feminine. Anybody who's a fan of Avatar: The Last Airbender knows that Toph is she's a tomboy. She is not girlish in any way. She just does what she does. Like, she is a badass, a tiny, blind, diminutive badass who doesn't care how she looks. Prefers to get up. She isn't happy unless she has a little thin grime of skin, a little bit of grime on her. She walks barefoot everywhere. Yeah. Yes, Devil, exactly. This is just like making Goku a high school teenager. You can take liberties with the adaptation, like they took liberties with Devil May Cry, something I enjoyed. Yeah, what is happening? Yeah, the Hellmouth has been opened up. But yeah, I mean, Toph was purposely made not to be feminine. She was a polar opposite to Katara, which itself was a nice juxtaposition. You got Katara, who's this nice, motherly, feminine figure who could totally blood bend the crap out of you if you pissed her off. And you got Toph, this hardcore, badass, blind bender who is one of the strongest earthbenders in the show, not named Boomy. And you're just gonna make her. This is worse than when they decided to go the route of not making Sokka a chauvinist. That's part of his charm. He was a chauvinist to start about, and he had to learn and adapt and grow. It's called having flaws. Why is Hollywood doing this? I don't know, LPH. It's like they're saying, we don't care about the characters that you want to see. We're gonna make the characters that we want to see, and you will like it. And if you don't like it, then you're a racist or a chauvinist or somethingist. My God, I mean, just makes me sad. But I digress. I think that's enough bitching and moaning. I think it's time for us to get to what we're supposed to do. Yeah, it's a crap show. It is a crap show. I think it's time for us to get down to business. So, Law, I know it's been a while. I know your crew got wiped out by Blackbeard, but you think you could do the thing? Thank you, Law. Oh, wrong one. All right. Today, I decided, like the story, like the intro says, we're going to be digging into some Warmachine lore. In fact, we're going to be rereading an entire story. Yeah, in all the source books, they always include like little stories from the characters that they are profiling in the source books. Like if there's a new model or something, they always make a little story that takes place within the world. And this is from the Warmachine book, The Pirates of the Broken Coast. This was the official book that introduced pirates to Warmachine. The Broken Coast is what the coast of Western Emerald is called because it looks like it's a bunch of different islands all around the coast. That's why, because if you look at a map of the coast itself, it just looks all broken up and mangled and shit with islands dotted around it. And this is where the pirates were introduced. All right, this particular story takes place. This is the very first story to feature the pirates of the Broken Coast. And there were only three warcasters in the entirety of Warmachine that are considered pirates, or at least privateers. They're the most noteworthy, and we'll bring them up now. First and foremost, we have this guy. Say hello to Bartolo Montador, aka Broadsides Bart. He's officially sanctioned as a privateer, though he straddles the line between privateer and pirate in the lore. He is a privateer in the service of the Kingdom of Ord, which sits between Kador and Signar, right smack dab in the middle of them. They don't have a powerful military or anything like that. They just have great economic and political powers, so much so that they've been able to their kingdom is relatively neutral in all the wars that have popped up all over the place. Broadsides Bart is a character in and of himself. Just look at him. He cuts the very definition of a pirate. He has the tricorder hat, he's got the cutlass, he's got the big beard on him, and there's his artificial hand with a cannon. That's a cannon up his artificial hand, and he calls that cannon Ace. No, not after the One Piece character. No, he named it Ace because because the cannon is literally up his sleeve. It's an ace up his sleeve. Yeah. All right, next up. Say hello to Fiona the Black. Probably one of the most infamous female pirates on the entire Meridius. Fiona is a Thammarite, meaning that she is a follower of one of the twins, Thamar. Those who follow Thammarites, those who follow the ways of Thamar, are very powerful in the arcane arts. They don't let little things like morality and rules and order get in their way. If you want to do something as a Thammarite, you just do it. That's just how Thammarites are, and they're actually pretty cool. They're complete opposites of the Morrowinds, who are the Morrowinds are very Christian-like. Although you could call the Menites Christians, but that's neither here nor there. Now, she's not actually a captain. She is actually a member of another crew, but she has so much influence that she might as well be a captain. So she and Broadsides Bart are in a quote-unquote partnership. What this partnership entails, we don't know. Are they fucking? I don't know. Maybe. And finally, we have perhaps the flat-out first ever pirate we have. There's no distinction about it. He is a pirate. Captain Phineas Shea of the pirate ship the Talon. Now, I recently did an entire video series profiling all the members of the Talon, probably the most infamous pirate crew in the entire Meridius. Quick synopsis. Shea was once a journeyman warcaster who was put aboard the MLS Exeter, MLS standing for the Macarian League, which is the biggest shipping conglomerate in the entirety of the Iron Kingdoms. Now, aboard the ship, he made friends with a lot of people, among them being the financier, Lord Joan Rockbottom, who is a dwarf, or rulefolk as they called in the lore. The captain was paranoid about this and had Shea thrown overboard. Shea got back on and orchestrated a mutiny. They were able to take down the captain, but he set off a powder magazine that destroyed the ship. So, out of retribution, they strapped the motherfucker to the cannon, which is a gigantic cannon called the Commodore Cannon, and fired it until he died from it. And his body is still hanging from the front of the Commodore Cannon to this day. I did an entire video about it. There's a picture of the Commodore cannon. Yeah, it's a giant fuck off cannon with a skeleton on top of it. So yeah. I was gonna, before I quit the game, I was gonna transition from Khador to Pirates, specifically because I love the Talon Charter. They're a very great, a very nice crew. You can field the entire crew if you want to. So yeah, there's that. So, with that out of the way, this story will take place probably right around the time at the beginning of his official pirating career. So all three of these characters will be making an appearance in here. As for the music itself is part of the soundtrack to one of my favorite games of all time, Skies of Arcadia, which is very fittingly a RPG about sky pirates. Fits the theme, don't you think? All right, with that out of the way, let's get down to business. The title of this story is called The Better Part of Valor and Told in Acts. And let's get to it. Act 1. Wherein a pirate and a privateer learn of an opportunity for profit and revenge. The sleek, predatory vessel Talon exchanged cannon fire with its prey before sliding alongside. Grapples arced between the ships, and two hulls clenched tight with a grinding protest of wood and metal. The battle-ready crew filled the air with yells and pistol fire as men leapt across, cutlasses in hand, to cut down any defenders. Captain Phineas Shea strode aboard the Talon's rails to find with satisfaction the initial boarding of a Macarian League vessel, Lasting Promise, well underway. Sorry, I gotta put that on the right picture. Okay, man. Shea drew his pistol and took a bead of a lead gunner crouched behind the railing of the poop deck. A squeeze of the trigger sent the man tumbling down and his rifle clattering to the lower deck. Shea holstered his pistol and drew his mechanical saber Squall. First Mate Hawk appeared by his side, blades ready, and they shared a look that did not require words. They grabbed ropes and soared across the deck to the enemy vessel. A shout went up from the Talon's crew as the pair waded in. Hawk landed 3 quick thrusts for every one of Shea's powerful cuts. Shea signaled back to the Talon. A crewmate operating the crane swung over out of a dangling mariner warjack out of a creeping cable and dropped down to the deck of the Lasting Promise. It landed deftly despite its size, crushing deck boards under its feet. Shea touched its cortex and mentally urged the jack into the thickest knot of the defenders, its anchor sweeping in an arc and shattering the Macarian League mariners like dolls. The advancing jacks and wardcaster drained the will to fight of the rest of the defenders. Many threw down their arms and immediately surrendered. A few officers made a fighting retreat towards the aft decks, but Shea knew it was over. He and Hawk advanced towards the last holdouts. After years of capturing Macarian League vessels, the Talon crew had developed a rather innovative but quite effective routine for taking what they needed most from the prisoners: information. They inevitably shared with the captain and rarely had to proceed much further. They could not predict what a given captain might know, but they usually could find something useful, such as reports of other League ships carrying lucrative cargo, recent sightings of Signaran naval vessels, or the location of hidden stashes. This drama required the crew to bring the surrendered captain to Shea and Bosun Grogspar for interrogation, and then Shea is left to deal with a fabricated dispute. Grogspar would express his delight at the sudden opportunity to indulge his appetite for torture. When the captain started to sweat it at the thought of what Grogspar might do, Quartermaster Walls would barge into the cabin. The quartermaster would try and fail to keep the Trollkin in check, and then he would plead with the captive to cooperate for his own good. The routine lacked subtlety, but inevitably the browbeaten captain would give up whatever information he thought could keep him alive. On this particular occasion, while Grogspar and Walls played their parts, Captain Shea stood in the corridor debating with the expedition financier, the peg-legged dwarf named Lord Joan Rockbottom. This leaky tub better be worth something. Rockbottom shook his head. The closest port we could sell it is too far. Just seize the cargo and leave them. Naval patrol might come through at any time. Sea dogs hurried around them looking for anything remotely valuable to pry loose, toss in a sack, or drag behind them. Aside from any treasure so acquired, the great reward for piracy is laying claim of whole vessels. Whenever possible, the Talon crew would capture a ship and take it as a prize, while setting the captain and officers adrift to the nearest launch. Shay frowned at the dwarf and prepared for a rebuttal. Grogspar emerged and interrupted by clearing his throat. Captain. Shane glanced towards the cabin. Is he singing already? The Trocan packed his pipe philosophically, stuck it back into his mouth, and raised a flint striker to light the leaves. He thinks we picked him up for a reason. Ain't got a clue what he's yawning about. You might want to give it a listen. Intrigued, Shay and Rockbottom followed Grogspar forward, and found Mr. Walls waiting with his agitated monkey Stubbs perched on his shoulder. Surrounded by the splinters of broken furnishings, stumped the Macarian League captain. His once fine uniform hung rumpled and torn, and his posture conveyed defeat. Rockbottom's peg leg made a stentorian rhythm on the floorboards. Tell us what you know, he said. The dwarf managed to convey menace despite his ridiculous attire. His enormous sidearm, a weapon ornated so it bore resemblance to the open mouth of a scaled monstrosity, doubtlessly helped. Look, I told the Trocan, I don't know anything about Fort Lammas. We just stopped there for supplies, I swear. He was clearly a young captain, probably with his first command. His wispy beard trembled pretentiously. Rockbottom looked at Shay. Ever heard of her Fort Lammas? Shay shook his head silently. Rockbottom lifted his weapon and set it against the man's shoulder. This is Fire Breather. Ignites anything it touches. It'll take your arm clean off and burn the stump to a husk, saving us the trouble of watching you bleed out. Ever left a pig shank roasting for too long? The smell is... Stop! I don't know anything. It's a supply fortress, one of many. I have no idea why so many ships and soldiers are there. Rockbottom glanced around, finding a crumpled chart amongst the detritus of the room, and jammed it into the captain's hands. Whereabouts would we find this little fortress of yours? Crebe Killingsworth, ship's surgeon and cook, served meat stew that evening for supper. Over the meal, the Talon's officers watched uncomfortably as Rockbottom and the captain argued. You want us to pillage a fortress? Shay had hardly touched his wine, a sign of his mood. Want to besiege Highgate next? He said. His sarcasm was heavy. The intensity of Rockbottom's words belied his apparent calm. When we signed our charter, we agreed that one of the things that bound us was vengeance against the League. Have we gotten too comfortable? Have we lost sight of our goals? He spent some time trying to slice a tenacious piece of gristly meat on his stew. What does that have to do with bloody anything? The League does not expend political influence or wealth idly. If this fortress is well guarded, whatever they must have must be valuable. Therefore, it is important to us. He punctuated his words by impaling an indeterminate vegetable with his fork. We're in the middle of a job, Shay countered. We're already jeopardized our deadline. We can't afford another delay or we won't get paid. You're the one who was harping about the money woes. If I might be so forgiven for butting in, I come down on the side of caution, Mr. Walls ventured. The one-eyed quartermaster was far more demure in conversation than his boarding actions. His monkey sat on the table directly next to his plate, eating a good portion of his meal. Attempts to evict the animal from the captain's table have long proven futile. We might be light on crew. We could use a few more hands before sticking the ones we got in the lion's mouth, so to speak. Rockbottom's face flushed red. A few more hands means less dividing up the spoils. Look here, I'm not speaking purely from a thirst for revenge. If the League is guarding something that well, we can be damn sure it's a lucrative haul. Could be a bullion run. The League took charge of the bullion exchange when Loren fell to Kador. Might be the treasury of Ord in that fortress. Treasury of Ord? Grogspar snorted. What's that, 15 potatoes and a bucket of fish? Or a payroll shipment, Rockbottom continued, pointedly ignoring the Trollkin. Why not check it out? If the risk looks bad, we'll leave. Hawk spoke for the first time. Isn't that the region where Broadside Bart is roaming? This is the sort of idiotic maneuver that he would try to pull off. Clearly she was intended to counter the dwarf, but Rockbottom's eyes gleamed as he looked at Shay. The two warcasters' rivalry often prompted foolish bravado. Shay took a sizable swallow from his wine and mulled things over before speaking. It wouldn't hurt to investigate. He avoided Hawk's smoldering glare. Okay. There was no other ship like the Calamitous. Captain Bartolo Montador had commissioned it in Breck, Ord's famed port city, and rebuilt it to his exacting specifications from the frame of a massive retired naval galleon as the ultimate floating arsenal. Breck's shipwrights had all balked on seeing the plans. Everyone insisted that such a monstrosity would never float, let alone move under its own weight. But Montator had found and bribed the best of them enough to make it work eventually. Multiple steam engines large enough to power a colossal drove 3 paddle wheels combined with 4 masts thick with sails. When given time to build up momentum, the Calamitous achieved impressive speeds under full steam and sail. The ship certainly took its time making turns, but Montador considered it an acceptable trade-off for raw firepower. A first-rate Auric or Signarin sailing ship of the line boasted 3 gun decks stretched from port to stern. Kador had largely switched to squat, flat iron hulls, but still sailed a few war galleons outfitted with 4 gun decks. Overkill for any regular engagement. Montador designed the Calamitous with 5 gun decks to provide concentrated fire against enemy ships from the waterline to the sea. The ship boasted heavier guns towards the prow, 2 turrets on the main deck, dozens of small deck guns with swivels, and a forward cupola of mid-range guns with wide fields of fire. If all this proved insufficient, the ship's concave prow, reinforced with a spiked poltroon, could cleave through lesser vessels. Although the Calamitous boasted more firepower than any privateer or pirate that needed, its size did have its drawbacks, however, and they were largely compensated by its 2 smaller and more versatile escorts, the steam brig Ill Fortune and the much smaller but nimbler schooner Stiletto. Unfortunately, this day, as the Calamitous bore down on its chosen prize, both of those vessels were away on errands. The stout warcaster captain stood at the wheel, spyglass in hand, appraising the situation while consulting Master Gunner Dougal McNeil. The ship's pilot, Lupo Tavora, manned the wheel and awaited his captain's commands. He occasionally yanked a lever to his left to send orders to the engine room or to raise a flag on the forward deck officers to adjust the rigging or sails. "We got at least 1 good shot. That boat will veer starboard and we'll never catch it," says the master gunner. "The forward guns are too strong. Need to turn them to the wind and catch it on the center turret." "We'll just scare them a little bit. Slow her down and come on alongside." Montador eyed the distant boat with a squint. A small schooner he recognized as a gemstone courier out of Mercier, and his gambler's mind calculated the odds. "Fire now, and we'll lose our chance. Gots be damned. Where's the Stiletto when I need her?" Dougal sighed, but dutifully instructed the pilot to turn 20 degrees to starboard. Assuaging levers or flags, Dougal cupped his hands to his mouth and shouted the command, Fire starboard plow guns at 15 above the waterline. The forward gunner's mate repeated the command, subtracting the seconds to account for the delay, and again to another mate, standing at the hatch above the cannons below the foredeck. Care to wager? Dougal asked his captain with a sour expression on his scarred face. The usual jovial Montador grunted without humor. His face bore a scowl of a man who hated to lose any gamble, no matter how trivial. Dougal had spent decades at sea mastering the arts of precisely packing powder charges and calculating accurate cannon volleys. His predictions rarely went wrong. The powerful blast of the two of the large forward cannons blew black smoke over the prow. Montador raised his spyglass and counted down the seconds until impact. Both shots hit true, and Montador saw a dramatic explosion of wooden planks. Within a few moments, the vessel listed, floundered, and sunk beneath the waves with all hands and cargo. By Tamar's wicked teats! Montador barely stopped himself from hurling the expensive spyglass to the deck. He saw Dougal smirking sardically and growled, "Not another word from you!" An hour after this debacle, the crow's nest spotted the ill fortune and the stiletto. The crew erupted into a fit of active swabbing the decks, polishing the brass, and making the ship presentable as possible. No one questioned this familiar tradition. The ship always looked its best when the mistress of the ill fortune came aboard, or swabs would feel the boatswain's lash. Montador waited on the quarterdeck near his quarters as the ill fortune's launch came alongside and the passengers boarded. An uncomfortable familiarity always prevailed when the woman known as Fiona the Black stepped aboard the larger vessel. The whole crew went quiet and adopted their best behavior. Given they were a rowdy assortment of pressed sailors and cast-off misfits, this primarily meant less spitting on the deck boards and fewer wolf whistles. Fiona soaked in the attention as expected. Her Warcaster armor, cleverly engineered to protect every inch of her body without restricting her graceful movements, only accentuated her shapely form as she stepped on deck. Her cloak, black with sumptuous purple accents, caught the wind and swept behind her. Teneron brads, the three downwind barbed arrows symbolizing the dark goddess Thamar, emblazoned her attire. Fiona pulled her red hair back into a lengthy braid, which loaned an accented cast to her otherwise appealing features. One hand held the haft of her mechanical weapon, Viper, like a walking stick. She sharpened the three tines, sometimes twitching sporadically as if they were alive and hungry to bite flesh. Fiona's presence dominated the deck, and the Calamitous seemed like her ship at that moment. Her retinue went almost unnoticed, but included the ill fortune's thin-as-a-rake captain, Calavar Santoni, and a particularly hulking Cadoran boatswain named Dragarish Gadarolfovich. Recognized throughout Montador's small fleet as Fiona's bodyguard, he glowered murderously at crewmen on either side of the walkway, daring one of them to go out of line. Montador gave a roguish smile and ran his hands through his beard as she approached, not bothering to hide his admiring gaze as it traveled from her boots to her face. "Ah, Fiona, a pleasure as always. What news from the shore?" Fiona smirked more than smiled. Glancing about her with her typical conspiratorial suspicion, Fiona nodded to Montador's cabin door. "Inside." The entourage moved to follow, but Montador interposed. He gave them an icy stare and placed his mechanical hand against Dragonish's chest. The Cadoran growled, but looked down at the mouth of the telescoping cannon set within the metal palm and took a step back. Montador's voice remained polite and warm. "You lads wait out here." He closed the door behind them and turned to the woman. She asked him, "Afraid they'll murder you in your own cabin?" Montador chuckled and spread his hands, one living and one mechanical. "Anytime I get to be alone with you is too precious to let the chaperones ruin it. Tell me what happened." "Nothing untoward." Her eyes flashed mischievously. "My rumor mongers have been busy." Something special is happening at the Lamnis supply fortress just north of here. Something the Makarian League and the Sonara Navy don't want anyone to know about. He frowned. But we're going south. She smiled with a true smile. Not for long. Trust me. We want in on this. He ran his fingers through his beard again. I'd just as soon not tangle with the Signar Navy. Them boys at Highgate are watching for me. They think I was involved in the sinking of the Island Protector. He said the last in a vaguely offensive tone, despite the fact that he had indeed sunk the patrolling vessel 2 months earlier. Very well. She turned and made for the door, but stopped her with her fingers on the handle. My sources say Captain Phineas Shea learned of this target several days ago. It'll be difficult temptation for him to resist, I think. The large privateer raised an eyebrow. Really? He laughed and shook his head. That man's been a born scapegoat. Fine. Let's see if we can find the Talon. With lanterns doused, the crew scolded to keep whispers and rely solely on the wind. The Talon ran near invisible at night, particularly close to shore. Their cautious approach proved fortuitous as they drifted closer. Look at him, Groxbar mumbled in what passing for a Trocan whisper. That ain't good. Rockbottom borrowed the bosun's spyglass and peered out. The overcast sky and darkness made it difficult to discern details. Fortunately, the Signaran Navy ships had their lanterns lit, likely to avoid collisions. He counted no fewer than 5 vessels anchored near the opening of the inlet, 2 of them most certainly second-class fighting ships. The others looked small, dangerous, and predatory. They didn't sit quite as low in the water as the Talon, but they boasted similar firepower and the capacity to carry large crews. Those 2 on the far right might not be Navy ships, hard to tell. Could be League brigs. It wasn't much optimism it was as much optimism as the dwarf could manage. Beyond the ships, the sheer face of the cliffs extended into the sky on either side of the narrow opening, suggesting they would find no land approaching. Grogspar glared at the Ruick financier and bit hard on the stem of his pipe. He turned to a sailor nearby. Go and wake the captain. The swab sent back was a relatively new recruit named Finley, but the crew called him Frogfoot for his limp. As he approached the captain's quarters, one of his peers cleared his throat loudly to catch Finley's attention. He saw the man shaking his head and making several emphatic but incomprehensible gestures. Finley decided to ignore them. I got my orders. Before he could even knock on the door, it suddenly opened. Finley snapped to attention, but then lost all composure when he saw Hawk step out of the cabin, adjusting her blouse. Her eyes opened wide enough to roll out of his eyes opened wide enough to roll out of his head. All the color in the first mate's face drained away, and her eyes narrowed with a sudden rage. Finley began to stammer as he saw her reach for her waist, but her groping hand found only air. Grogspaw asked for the captain, sir. She leveled a finger at his nose. If you speak of this, or if I see you when I come back out, I will gut you. She returned to the cabin, and Finley had a sudden vision of her paired cutlasses. Praying to every divinity that he could remember, Frogfoot fled as fastly as his limp allowed for him. Captain Shea inspected the situation, frowned, and reluctantly gave the order to turn around and put some distance between the Talon and the cove before dawn could reveal them. He mumbled something about wanting to consider his, quote, tactical options, unquote. Both Hawk and Walls looked smug, but knew better than to rub it in. Shea didn't order them to resume their previous circumspect course around the Makarian Hook and onto Clocker's Cove. However, Rockbottom and Shea disappeared into the captain's cabin to deliberate, and Hawk paced the deck, disciplining any sea dog she spotted loafing around. The severity and creativity of her punishments impressed even Bosun Grogspar. A sudden shout came from the crow's nest. "Sails approaching, hoy! Dead to port, sails approaching!" Shay and Rockbottom rushed out as the sailors moved quickly to prepare the ship for maneuvers, not wanting to betray their position with a plume of smoke. They waited to stoke the engines. Shay's question, "Navy?" popped to the nest. "Skull and crossbones!" came the cheerful reply after a few long minutes. "It's the Calamitous!" Hawk and Shay shared a look. "You talk to him," Hawk suggested in a voice low enough that no one else could hear. "This could work out in our advantage." Shay scowled. "He might be just here to claim the bounty on my head. He's had opportunities for that before. Just ensure he's more motivated to keep you alive." He made a dismissive gesture. "We don't need him. Just don't be an ass. The firepower he brings might just be what we need. If your pride is worth killing yourself over, maybe I'm on the wrong ship." Seeing her grim expression and the way she folded her arms stopped any and all of his retorts. Soon the vessels drew close enough to shout salutations. The Calamitous loomed over the Talon as if prepared to swallow the smaller vessel whole. The Ill Fortune, closer to the Talon's scale, approached on their port side, while the Stiletto sailed behind. The crew endured considerable posturing as each captain offered the others hospitality that none of them seemed willing to accept. Shay eventually proved to be the most stubborn. For added spite, Shay had turned the imposing Commodore Royal Weight cannon towards the opening of the rails, which made its yawning mouth the first thing the visitors saw when they came aboard. The skeleton of the man who had given the cannon its name, attired in moldy, scarred, and torn Macarian League uniform, dangled below the bore. No one manned the cannon, so it posed no threat, but a number of the guests did flinch at the sight of the petty amusement of both Shay and Grogspar. Fiona stepped aboard first. She appeared quite comfortable as she ran her hands along the rail, admiring the carved skulls decorating its surface. She approached Shay with a warm smile and touched his arm in a familiar fashion. "Captain Phineas Shay. Always a pleasure to see you. It's been too long." She ignored pointedly Hawk silently glaring at her from a few feet away. They ignored the Ill Fortune's actual captain, Santoni, and the commander of the Stiletto, Master Blake Donovan, a quietly competent but utterly unremarkable officer. Broadside's Bart Montador and his entourage boarded at last. "Here comes the Admiral," Shay noticed sarcastically as they watched the oversized launch, actually a single-masted boat nearly 40 feet long, adorned with polished brass, flying Montador's colors, approached. The bearded Todoran stepped onto the deck, putting his hands on his hips, and looked around as if his surroundings greatly displeased him. Megan Dirty Meg Meroni immediately upstaged him. She boarded after Bart's chief mate, Old Stony Bowen, and Master Gunner McNeil, but elbowed her way to the front. "Well, tits on a monkey! I haven't seen you in a long while." She hooked a thumb towards Montador. He tried to keep me from tagging along, but I'll have none of it." As usual, grease and grime covered her skin and clothes in contrast to the others who had taken pains to dress up. The Talon officers enthusiastically greeted Meg first, which made Montador bristle. Meg was a popular visitor in Bottomton, the island town and smuggler's refuge, which served as the second home for the Talon crew, and her mechanical skills had proven invaluable, particularly after notable difficult scrapes nearly wrecked most of Shay's jacks. Montador's deep voice cut him short. "Damar's teeth, people! Can't we get down to business at hand?" A lot of them moved to Shay's dining room, ignoring Montador's quips about being in a tiny closet. Montador spoke first after they were seated. "We all know why we're here, so let's cut through the usual nonsense. We all want the same prize. My hunch says there's enough for everybody." Shay glared at Montador. "We got here first." "And turned right around back to did?" Montador countered. He raised his hand to forestall an angry rebuttal. Not that I blame ye. Seeing what you faced, it's a tough line. We had a plan, Rockbottom protested feebly. A plan aided by adding 3 vessels, including one with enough cannons to break the walls of Caspia, Montador suggested. Considering how many battle-ready lads we all have together, I can't imagine you hold many jacks in this little boat. Shay cleared his throat. 3 mariners, a freebooter, and 1 buccaneer. 2 if we could get the other one running. He gave Dirty Meg a wink. Not bad, Montador allowed in a condescending tone. Considering what we're facing, we're better off working together. Fiona and I have made for the line and broken our way through, but we decided to include ye, given our old friendship. Hawk spoke with a voice thick with derision. You know damn well the cove is too shallow for any of your ships to land except for the Stiletto. You'd have offloaded men in rowboats while the fortress would blast out of the water before any of you reached the pier. You need the Talon. The blustering warcaster chuckled and wagged his finger at her with unflamed admiration. Ah, well said, well said. We need ye for the landing, and ye need us to break through the line. Rockbottom squinted at the visitor. I'm surprised you tarnish your sterling reputation tangling with the Signar Navy. You're talking about shooting up 5 of their ships. Are we not pirates or simpering dandies? Montador laughed. Large profits require spilling of blood. It's the life we lead. You speak rather freely for being a pirate for a man who hides behind a letter of marque. This remark finally got under the larger man's skin, and he bristled at Shay. Fiona had silently watched, but chose this moment to speak. Enough. We know we must cooperate. Let's discuss the shares and get to the plan. The haggling came down to Rockbottom and Montador debating like fishmongers. The others remained silent and staring across the length of the table at one another. Shay noted Fiona's lingering glance upon him with an inviting smile, and he shifted uncomfortably. At her side, Captain Santoni's face turned bright red when he attempted to conceal his jealous outrage. Shay pretended interest in Rockbottom's wheeling and dealing to avoid catching Hawk's eye. Working out the plan of attack proved faster and simpler, given their limited options. They would use the Stiletto and the Ill Fortune as a distraction to pull as many ships as possible from the cove. Once they're committed, the Calamitous and the Talon would make for the cove. The heavier ship would break through or engage as necessary. The smaller vessel, loaded with as many sea dogs and warjacks as it could hold, would make for a landing and slip through the fortress's defenders. They would seize whatever they could and escape. Communications between the ships relied on signals only, passably familiar with each other for coordinated actions in the past. As they left, Fiona made an unexpected announcement. I'll stay on the Talon, she added. You'll want me here. A little added support during the landing could make all the difference. She and Captain Montador shared a look. The burly privateer nodded almost imperceptibly. And that's the end of Act 1 of this nice little story. So, if you didn't know much about these guys, we got enough of it to let you know what's going on. Broadside's Bard is as boisterous as he looks, as well as Captain Shay. Shay is cautious but a risk taker. We see that Bosun Grogspar, who is a Trollkin, is an absolute bastard. He is feared for a reason. And we see Fiona the Black taking a very keen eye in our dear Captain Shay, which is not exactly welcomed by First Mate Hawk. And if they didn't tell you enough, they fucking. Hawk and Shay, I mean, not Hawk and Fiona, not Shay and Fiona. Yeah, but this is my first time reading about Dirty Meg. It's nice that Meg actually is well liked by the various members of the other crew, because she's just a gearhead that everybody likes. Wasn't sure what voice to give McDougal though. And I will have to say that not every one of the characters that are in here do have models. The only ones that I read for that actually have models would be, of course, Shay, Bart, and Fiona, First Mate Hawk, McDougal, Master Gunner McDougal, Dirty Meg has a model, Grogspar has a model, Mr. Walls has a model, including his pet monkey Stubbs, and Doc Killingsworth, he has models. Everybody else that appeared in this one, Frogleg and Captain Santoni, they do not have models in the game, so you will not be able to play as them. In fact, this is the first time I've ever seen and heard of Captain Santoni, and he just doesn't sound like someone I would want to play. But yeah, that was Act 1, so let's move on to Act 2. Time to see what's so important about this damn fortress that two of the most infamous pirates on the Meridius will be joining forces. So, if you're still with me, thank you. Alright, Act 2, wherein an outpost receives uninvited guests.
This is why wasting time tongue-wagging on plans is stupid,
Grogspar remarked, standing next to Hawk, Fiona, and Shay. He peered out on the horizon with his arms folded across his ample stomach. Even without a spyglass, he could see that the largest naval vessels and one of the smaller ones had set sail to the west, away from the cove. Think the ill fortune could have gotten there ahead of schedule? Shay asked.
Not a chance, not in this one,
Grogspar opined, and the two women agreed. It was early dawn. They had made their approach keeping close to the sheer cliffs of Signarin's imposing Wormwall Mountains as possible. At this angle, the cliffs loomed like a wall of towering stone fangs, and made it obvious that they had gotten their name. The dawn's light spread shadows from the cliffs from out onto the water, large enough to hide even the bulk of the Calamitous. The other two ships had taken a wider course to approach from a different angle. Where in blazes are they going? Shay's tone was suspicious. What does it matter? This is our chance. Fiona's voice carried a throaty undertone, suggesting that she derived a disturbing degree of pleasure from violence. They heard a rumbling so powerful they could feel it as a tangible pressure. The gigantic pistons driving the Calamitus's paddle wheels thumped, audibly even from the distance, and great plumes of smoke arose from the tremendous stacks of the ships as the ship came to full steam. Its rear paddle wheel dug into the ocean, and the ship itself visibly rose on its wide pontoons attached to the lower hull. These pontoons enabled the Calamitous to achieve good speed by lifting the ship higher in the water than otherwise would be possible for its tonnage. The Talon quickly unfurled its own sails and cranked its paddle wheels to life. Captain Shay seemed the only one suspicious of the way the Navy ships had sailed away. Seems a bit lucky, he nodded to Grogspar. Fiona interjected. Damar is a lucky goddess, and I have her favor. She grinned smugly, enjoying his distaste from the topic. Damar can keep her luck. I hear it comes with a steep price. As the Talon moved towards the two remaining Signarin vessels, the officers spotted the ill fortune in the Stiletto approaching according to the original plan. The vessel guarding the entrance to the cove proudly flew two flags, one representing the Signarin fleet stationed at Highgate, and the other bore the triple anchor and waves of the Third Army. One ship, a mid-sized two-masted steam brig with a stout hull and heavy stacked guns, proved slow to realize its peril. Its sails unfurled and its wheels cranked into motion to line up on a broadside, just as the Calamitous and the accelerating Talon moved out of the cliff shadows to engage. Its companion vessel looked like a small and nimble sloop of war that carried too few cannons to pose much of a threat. Captain Montador grinned with a hungry enthusiasm as he watched the naval ship trying to catch its wind and bellowed out orders to his crew. He felt the rhythm of the wind above him and the vibrations of his ship's engines through the soles of his boots. He had craned 4 mariners with loaded guns on the upper deck and stationed them in strategic points along the port side. Monador reached out with his mind and directed their awareness to the smaller vessel and prepared to direct their fire at his will. Meanwhile, Dougal McNow sent the order to ready the ship's main guns and for a broadside. The smaller ship worried Montador. He could not afford to have it escape and take word of it to the Signarin authorities. The Calamitous plunged through the towering waves like a juggernaut, and Montador felt the battle lust fill his veins. For a moment, he considered risking everything to ram the Navy vessel. Nothing satisfied him more than the explosion of shattered lumber underneath the prow of his ship. Ultimately, he judged the angle of the approach wrong. "Hard to starboard! Prepare to fire!" He gestured to his officers with his weighty cutlass red-tied and conveyed the required instructions to the decks below. The Navy ship managed to align itself, and its cannons fired with flashes of orange and red. The sounds of their small thunder quickly reached the ears of those aboard the Calamitous. Sea dogs closest to the railing took cover as shots splintered through the railings and others impacted below with the crunch of lumber. Screams erupted on deck as men lacerated with splintered debris. Despite a few casualties, most of the hastily fired volley had no effect. The weight of their guns could not penetrate the stout hull. Montador laughed as he raised his sword and roared the command, "Fire!" A few seconds thereafter, he felt in his bones a sound like the gods tearing off the roof of the sky to bellow at the world. A thrum of concussive power shook the hull, and the air split with a deafening roar. The port side of the ship lifted from the broadside's force, and the ship swayed to the starboard, even against the buoyancy of the pontoons. The Navy vessel literally disintegrated as 4,000 pounds of iron tore through its sails, masts, decks, and hull, obliterating everything. Its outline vanished in erupting geysers of spraying water, splintering wood, and collapsing sails as it blazed with brief flickers of fire before the waves consumed them. Not even enough of the vessel remained to sink. There was just an unrecognizable assortment of blood-floating flotsam dispersing across the water. Montador rushed to the rails and scanned for the second vessel, which, as expected, veered off to run perpendicular to the wind. Knowing it would take too long to align for another volley, Montador urged the mariners standing at the prow to fire. The 4 cannons discharged almost in unison. It was a difficult shot at the outer edge of the effective range, but he poured energy into the effort to guide the cannonballs by sheer force of will alone. 2 plumes erupted in a wide right arc, but one slammed into the deck, and the last one hit true, shattering the smaller vessel's mainmast. This brought time for a turret to swing around and deliver a killing shot, letting the Meridius swallow the smaller ship at last. A great shout went aboard the Talon as the Calamitous obliterated both Signarin vessels. Many of the men currently on deck had come from Montador's fleet and had mixed uncomfortably with the ship's regular crew. 2 fights had already erupted, prompting Hawk and Grogspar to enforce discipline. The outsiders had been told to stay out of the way and to stand armed and ready for landing, but the density of unwashed sailors on the Talon put everyone on edge. Cutting sleekly through the morbid debris of a once proud Signarin Navy vessel, the Talon sailed through the wide opening of the cove and steered towards the fortress set back from the small stretch of sandy beach opposite. The water in the center of the cove seemed reasonably deep, but it was quickly flattened to shallows near a short jetty extended to receive smaller landing vessels. The fortress itself was stout but not particularly large, consisted primarily of a squat stone keep and 2 smaller fortified outbridges connected to walkways. Soldiers rushed about on the pier, and upper battlements reacted to the sound of the Calamitous' broadside. Explosions from the fortress proved it had its own cannons, and shots plunged into the water near the approaching vessel. Shay's mariners stood topside with cannons primed, as did the crews manning the forward deck guns. "Fire on the upper battlements," Shay ordered. Sprays of rock and debris from exploding cretaceans did not do much damage, but kept the fortress's gun crews distracted. The Commodore scored the best shot that washed the entire section of the upper battlements in flaming oil and silenced 3 cannons as their crew lost heart and fled. Rifle fire pinged on the deck and whizzed by the nearby waters. Grunts of pain preceded the sea dogs falling on the deck. Shay's own riflemen in the nests on the mast returned fire, although the swaying of the vessel challenged their accuracy. As expected, once blood began to flow, Shay spotted Doc Killingsworth up and about. The large man had his dirty apron and battered hat checked for injuries and put his knives to use in digging bullets out of the wounded before the injuries could fester. He often had to wrestle and pin down his unwilling patients. Shay did his part to interfere with the enemy by summoning a shifting phantasm of ghostly light and fog to play over the decks. The position of the ship itself became difficult to discern as shimmering shapes leaped across the nearby waves and presented solid seeming mirrors of the Talon, while masking its true form behind hazy mirages. This bought time to slide neatly alongside the extended pier. Soldiers hunkered down behind improvised barriers of supply crates and sacks of vegetables fired at the approaching pirates. Anchors plunged into the water and sea dogs leapt into the quay to tie the ship close for the gangplanks. One of Shay's buccaneer jacks lashed out with his gaff to haul the ship against the wood. Bullets ricocheted off its metal frame, but they didn't slow it from clinching a rope to help secure the vessel. Sea dogs tossed the planks over the gap, rushed down, and fired pistols to clear the way. Shay drew his own blade and pistol. He knew without looking that Hawk was just behind him. He could see Mr. Walls at the fore of his own men shouting angrily at the gaggle of disorientated crew members below from the Ear Fortune who had gone ahead without orders. Shay had intended to send several jacks forward to clear the way, but the pier was clogged with men making a bloody advance. He caught up with Fiona just behind the initial wave of attackers. "This isn't what I told you to do!" She looked back with mock surprise. "Captain Shay, everything is in order. We've taken the pier. The fortress will fall as quickly." He growled. "My way would have saved a few lives, but you didn't care about all that." She laughed, clearly amused by Shay's assessment. She waved a hand in the direction of the enemy, and he felt a ripple of strange power. On the opposite end of the pier, a Signarmi Navy Marine suddenly tensed and turned to swing his broaded blade sword straight into the neck of his superior officer, who toppled before he could register surprise. Fiona's eyes sparked bright with malice and grim humor as she leapt onto the pier, viper in hand, and spoke a few other words of power. The grim-faced members of her personal escort chanted profane syllables in some incomprehensible tongue as they clustered protectively around her. They had a fervent shine to their faces that made Shay feel distinctly uneasy. A cluster of long gunners huddled down below a stone low outcropping just off the main path when they picked off the sea dogs with precise fire. Suddenly, as Fiona pointed at them, they erupted in screaming blazes of black and purple fire. As they burned, the dark fire seemed to pour up out of their eyes and stream from their gaping mouths as if their souls had been lit ablaze to suffer past death. Shay shook his head and advanced, selecting targets for his pistol and trying to ignore the dying screams. He had seen Fiona in action before, her seemingly inexhaustible manifestations of sorcery didn't surprise him. She had raw power to burn from a natural deep wellspring of unholy energy, and she had no need for careful artifacting when unleashing her arcane strength. Shay refused to be distressed and focused on the fortifications. He brought his mariner up through the advancing men while bellowing for them to clear the way. Signarin sentry Warjack, commanded by a harried officer who bore the marks of a Marine lieutenant, guarded the door. His chain gun spat bullets that chewed through the sea dogs foolish enough to advance on it. Others leapt to the side, seeking cover. Shay gave Fiona a look and closed in on the sentry, opening his hand as the chain gun swung in its direction. Primal energy surrounded him as wind whipped across the pier and became a fist-like knot of storm that exploded against the machine, sending it flying into the reinforced iron door and toppling to the ground. A resounding boom echoed from the Commodore from the fore of the ship, and the fallen Warjack exploded into countless pieces. Cannon fire echoed as the advancing mariners blew the doors apart. The fortress was breached. Shay learned the hard way that Signarin's Third Army and its associated fleet did not break easily. Seizing the fortress lost them more swabs than he had liked, and they had killed most of the officers before the rest surrendered. Shay had seen enough battle to harden him against killing and death, but the sheer volume of bodies left an unpleasant taste in his mouth. Either guilt or sadness, just a sense of waste. Likely this Signarin tenacity came from training to stand against the Cricks. They didn't expect mercy, so surrender had less appeal than a heroic death. Shay admired their resolve, but thought it foolish. The less resolute Macarian League mercenaries surrendered more readily. Hooting and yelling men rushed inside to eagerly find spoils. Shay, Hawk, and Fiona kept to the front, alertly scanning for anything that looked like could be a vault. Hawk stepped close to Shay and hissed at him. "Keep an eye on her. She's here to find the stash before we do. On Montador's orders, I reckon." She had looked pointedly at Fiona, who was certainly rushing ahead. Rockbottom tried his best to keep up with them, limping along on his peg leg, but they ignored his shouts and quickly left him behind. Mr. Walls had gone ahead with the first attack group and eventually rushed back. The one-eyed quartermaster and his monkey on his shoulder were half covered in blood, but little of it looked like to be their own, aside from a rather nasty gash on Walls' left temple.
"Think we found what we've been looking for, Captain?"
He pointed down the passage. Fiona noticed them break off immediately and rushed to catch them alongside her grim-faced escort, which include Bosun Dragnash Gervadich. "Not trying to lose me, are you, Phineas?" He gave her an insincere smile and said nothing. Soon they came to a hastily barred and locked metal door with bodies liberally screwed about. Pools and sprays of blood covered both the walls and the floors. Several sea dogs scrambled to nearby boxes and crates for anything useful to be discerned.
"Check the soldiers here for keys and what have you, but didn't find them,"
Walls explained.
"The door has a fancy lock on it and a gear dial."
Hawk squinted at the door with a frown. "We're not getting through this thing anytime soon." "Where's Grogspa?" Shay looked about the corridor and saw Rockbottom and the bosun hastily catching up. "Grogspa, how much explosive do you got?" The Trocan caught Shay's meaning at once and grinned with his pipe.
"Should be enough. Might want to get back a ways."
Even with explosives, the door proved difficult, and they finally brought in a freebooter to rip the thing off its hinges. After hurrying into the lantern-lit chamber, the group's excitement turned to confusion. They found a few heavy crates, but otherwise the room stood open. It looked like some kind of improvised living quarters. 2 cots, rumpled blankets, even what appeared to be the remains of a recent meal laid on the floor. Towards the back of the chamber, Shay gave a groan and wrinkled his nose as he discovered a patrician area with an improvised latrine.
"Yeah, this be a prison. Or I'm a monkey's uncle,"
Mr. Walls asserted, ignoring the bemused stare this brought from Fiona. Rockbottom seemed more interested in the various crates and boxes in the room and found a tool to pry them open. As yet, they saw no signs of any stash of great wealth. "Where are the prisoners?" Hawk asked. "This food isn't even cold." "Prisoners? I thought we were expecting gold bullion," Shay Rockbottom's explorations turned up little of particular value. The dwarf cursed and stomped about the chamber with the pry bar in his hands and murder in his eyes. He looked ready to tear open any box he could find or any person in his way. Shay stood, inspected the room closely, and noticed a strange shimmer in the air as Grogspar walked by smoking his pipe. The smoke moved oddly, and the warcaster caught the telltale sign of something blurry and indistinct trying to slip around them towards the doorway. His pistol was in his hand on an instant, and its pin lock was caught as he pointed the large barrel at the shimmering figure. "Hold it!" It so happened that Fiona at that moment stood on the other side of the shimmer. She looked at Shay with a hiss of anger, startled anger. "What's the meaning of this?" she demanded, but her voice faded as another female spoke. "Do not fire. We are unarmed." Suddenly, two figures stood in front of the surprised pirates, as whatever sorcery concealed them faded. One, a slender, refined-looking man wearing dark spectacles, had short but disheveled black hair and wore a rumpled but otherwise immaculately clean blue and white gray trimmed coat with gold on the high collar. The speaker proved to be an even stranger sight, an attractive woman with striking white hair whose pointed ears marked her out as an Iosan. She dressed as one accustomed to wealth, wearing expensive silks and a red cloak of supple shimmering fabric. Large red stones set in gold dangled from the dainty earlobes of her ears. "What the bloody?" The Iosan cut Shay's demand short as she hastened to reply. He held up a delicate hand and gave him an enchanting. She held up a dainty hand and gave him an enchanting look with eyes of almost sterling, almost golden shade. "We are prisoners. We seek only to escape from here. Can you help us?" Fiona stepped close to Shay and said with a sneer, "We have no time for this. We should grab what we can and go." "I'm not looking for passengers right now," Shay said at the same time. He thought furiously about their presence. "Are you reason for all these soldiers here? Why would the League need the Signar Navy to watch two prisoners?" "I am Lady Ayana, formerly of Ios, and my companion is Master Holt. As to why we are so well guarded, well..." The hint of a blush touched her fair cheeks. "I may have given the impression to them that I was an ambassador for Ios. A complete fabrication, I assure you, but it seemed prudent, given that they were not too thrilled at our having stumbled upon one of their clandestine meetings. Look, there is no time to explain. I believe there is a hue and alarm earlier this morning. Word came of Crixian vessels in the vicinity coming this way. They have dispatched some of their ships, but they could return at any time. We should really go." A sudden commotion outside distracted them. A wave of exclamations reverberated through the various sea dogs pillaging the fortress. "The Atraminus! The Atraminus is coming!" This prompted something close to panic, which Shay later described as a hasty retreat. He turned to speak again to the Iosan with the strangely compelling voice, but the mysterious duo had vanished. He cursed, but he had no time to track them down. Grabbing whatever they could seize, sea dogs made their way to the pier where the Talon waited. While they had to deal with the fortress, the ill fortune had moved into the cove and set a couple of small boats to the pier to recover their crew. Some of their sailors were heading for the carafe, but it became a confusing jumble with swabs winding up on whatever vessel they could find first, regardless of the actual port of origin. The hulking Calamitous drifted into the deepest part of the cove, taking a sentry position where the Navy ships once blockaded the entrance. Shay and the others did their best to control the panic and arrange for an orderly retreat. It took some effort to get Rockbottom to follow, since he had apparently found something interesting and wanted more time to investigate. He had to satisfy himself with plying several boxes onto Grogspar before rushing after. The departing group missed a peculiar sight in the room just outside the once-sealed vault. A slender, unmolested box that had been tipped over at the far end of the room righted itself. A small key appeared in the lock, and the lid opened to reveal a pair of pistols nestled within red silk folds. The ornate firearms had long, slender barrels, polished wooden grips, and wickedly sharp blades attached beneath. The pistols rose into the air and vanished. The panic of the men steadied when they spotted the warcasters and officers hurrying back, although every mate standing along the pier tried to give the details to Shay at once.
Silence! Get aboard, now!
Shay made sure someone trusty manned the controls of the crane to load the jacks before turning to the nearest salt. The Talon master gunner, One Ear Scarunti. Are you sure it was the Archimedes? I heard them lads on the stiletto. He jabbed his pipe towards the smaller vessel, picking up speed and moving away from the pier. Them accused, that accursed ships are coming, no question. They seen the Bafferys. Fear laced his voice despite his reputation as one of the most stalwart men with whom Shay had ever sailed with. Weigh anchor! Fire engines! Raise the sails! Shay shouted. Hawk went forward to ensure the departure was executed properly. Shay turned to the young gunner's mate Wayne, who had the unwanted task of keeping a head count. All accounted for? The youth gave a guilty look. No, sir. Can't get a count. Between them that died and others getting on other boats, people have pushed past me. Didn't see Creeb come aboard for one. Doc? Shay's eyes narrowed in surprise, and he looked around the deck where injured crewmen were lying, few getting any proper attention. Some of the older mates did their best to wrap their wounds into a cough. Grogspar spoke when he loaned his strength to the captain raising the main anchor.
Saw him on a rowboat headed to the Calamitous. Crazy fool got on the wrong ship.
Well, nothing to be done now. Let's be off and see if we can't get out of this alive. And so ends Act 2. Yeah, Act 2. Oh, hey, Pugsley, we got a lady up in here. Hey, Pugsley, how's it going? Glad to see you're up and about. Glad that you can make it. Nice that you got an evening off. So, to recap, our ad hoc pirate alliance has raided the fortress. A lot of people died, mostly because of Fiona, and she is a brutal bitch. That's what she is. Well, what did you expect from a Thamorite? In case that's Fiona. And we find out well, we're all just trying to be as good as we can be, Pugs dear. We just got to deal with it. And we have our first encounter. This is actually the first encounter that the Talon have with the two members of their crew who are not members of their crew. The Iosan, who is this is what they call elves. Elves are often called where they're from instead of just being elves. She's Iosan. And her bodyguard, Master Holt. And yes, there are models for them. They come as a pair. When they're not technically part of the Talon Charter, but people just include them anyway because they're traveling with the Talon Charter. But there's that. Yeah, but the Archimedes. The lore I got on that ship, that is the last ship you want to see in on the Meridius. It is like death incarnate. Yeah, you remember in the first Pirates of the Caribbean movie when they heard that the Black Pearl was coming? Yes, that kind of fear. It strikes fear in both regular Navy and pirates all the same, because the Archimedes is a pirate ship in the employ of Cricks. And yeah, you don't want anything to do with Cricks. Cricks are terrible. Cricks are scary. Yeah, they're zombie liches being created by a gigantic fuck-off dragon. So yeah, there's that. So, we're gonna move on to Act 3, wherein pirates learn that discretion is the better part of valor. The Calamitous' captain and foremost officers stood tensely at the wheelhouse, each staring at the horizon with their glasses. The stiletto had given them a good warning, but the enemy ship closed rapidly. Looks to be another ship, other ships behind it, Dougal noted. Monodor grunted. He had not seen them yet, but he trusted Master Gunner's keener eyes.
Think we can block them off?
His scope stayed squarely on the dreaded ship. Unholy fires burning across its sails, and its decks visibly glowed green even at this distance. We could guarantee you 1 or 2 good broadsides. Maybe even move to intercept, the chief mate Old Stoney said, sucking on a tooth. I'd pit this ship against anything but the Archimedes. And that tain't natural.
Keep the engines at full pressure and be ready to move, but keep us steady as long as possible. Until my signal.
Monodor gritted his teeth. He looked at the Talon, which seemed to be taking its sweet time to leave the pier.
Whatever they've got better be damn well worth it.
Onward sped the king of ghost ships, the dreaded Archimedes, whose name meant death and damnation to anything sailing the Meridius over the last 16 centuries. All sailors knew its reputation. The hopeless despair of defeating its immortal crew could only continue to rise in death. Still, Monodor watched it with a strange smile on his lips. He felt the lure of a worthy challenge. He leaned upon the nearest rail and felt the power of his vessel beneath his feet. He could almost sense the industrious movements of his gunners, packing powder and shot into the hungry maws of their cannons. He thought of the triumph and eternal glory that would be his if he could put an end to the Balefire Wraith flagship of the Ghost Fleet. The tremendous vessel approached with a quite unnatural speed. Rather than maneuvering to fire its own cannons, the Archimedes steered directly at them, thereby presenting the smallest target. The Archimedes did not rely on weather or its tattered sails for motion. It tapped a nearly spectral wind all of its own. The Calamitous heaved as the explosion of its massive broadside set forth a great volley that deafened the crew but had little other effect. Though the shot was accurately fired, the profile of the ship presented too little to allow for a meaningful impact, and its prow, set with iron teeth and engineered to cut through enemy vessels, carried as much armor as the Calamitous itself. The undead ship seemed to rise up across the surging waves like a charging beast eager for the kill. The ghost ship's green fire glowed clearly to the naked eye, and yet Montador felt compelled to peer through the spyglass and study the repellent but hypnotizing peculiarity of the almost living vessel. No other ship like her sailed the Meridius. It was a remnant of a forgotten age. The lines of the ancient dirge-mast funeral ship, amongst the proudest heritages of Montador's Todoran mariner ancestors, could still be seen in this twisted horror. Toruk had baptized this hull with dragon fire. Upon its charred timbers, dead hands had bolted curved sheets of sooty iron, and bony spikes protruded like tusks across its length. Balefire danced in swirling patterns and funnels on the deck as the decks were swarmed with the ever-rotting but industrious bodies of the damned. Undead pirates crewed over every exposed surface and climbed the impossibly burnt and rotted rigging. Their numbers seemed as thick as maggots on a bloated corpse. They were more eager to kill and slay than any living pirate, and were emboldened by their proven invincibility. Amid them lurked the nightmarish forms of death rippers, night wrenches, leviathans, harrowers, and more constructs. At the wheel of the aft deck, dressed in a blasphemous and rotting finery and standing like a pirate king of ancient days, waited the ship's master captain Rengrave, the first citizen of the Crixian Empire. Monodor tore his eyes away and strolled down to the pilot's deck, yelling orders to move his men in warjacks into better positions.
"Hold fire until they're nearly upon us,"
he yelled to Dougal, who nodded and passed word below to stop the gunner's mates before they could fire again.
"Get us moving hard to port. Don't let that damn thing ram us."
From the Talon's upper deck, Captain Shea got a good view of the imminent clash between the two great ships. He let Grogspar and Hawk handle the men while he concentrated on their angle of approach and getting his warjacks to the best positions for the upcoming battle. He saw the Calamitous beginning to move, too slowly, too ponderously, to try to slip and turn to the side to dodge the unavoidable Archimedes. At the last moment, the Archimedes leaned on its starboard, just as the Calamitous turned to port with its great spinning wheels, churning the water. The Archimedes did not break off entirely, but it did not hit them center mast. Its angle drove it to the aft section of the Calamitous with a sound of cracking lumber and the screech of bending iron. Shay winced and wondered if the large ship's rear paddle wheel could survive. They had other things to occupy their attention. As the ship's hull scraped together, revenants hurled grappling hooks onto the higher deck of the Calamitous and began to pour across by the dozens. Some slipped and fell into the water, but most made it. At least one harrower dug its pointed legs into the curved section of the upper hull and pulled itself towards the deck. At the moment, when the ships were fully exposed to along their sides, the Calamitous unleashed a full fury of its broadsides, deafening everyone on board the Talon. They saw the side of the larger vessel light up with nearly blinding flashes of exploding powder. It was a sight of pure violent beauty as the Archimedes tore apart from the cannonballs, shattering through its blackened and armored hull and exploding through entire sections of its outer surface. For several seconds, the roll of cannon fire seemed as if it would never end. Mondor's topside mariners and deck guns had added their clamor as new breaches opened up to them, and they fired their own freshly loaded ordnance through the thickening beams and planks. The ghost ship sagged visibly, and its entire side slipped into the water. Decks flooded as if the ocean hungered to devour the ship finally and extinguish its fires. A great cheer rose from the crew above the sounds of cracking lumber. Similar cheers rose from the ill fortune of the Stiletto as they raced ahead, turning to steer around to the far side of the faltering Durgan-mast ship and laid in their own cannon fire. Shay called his men to take what shots they could as they appeared. They also slipped past. The Archimedes groaned, and a dry wind erupted from it like an exultation, bringing choking ash and a noise like that of exultation, choking ash and exultation and a noise like the dying of an ailing beast as it slowly began to sink. The shouts and cheers of the crew of this spectacle ended as the Talon slid almost directly alongside the ghost ship to make the opening for the cove. Revenants targeted its decks with gunfire and leapt under the ship, oblivious to the returning fire and pistol fire. Before the collision, Captain Montador yelled for everyone to brace for impact. He gritted his teeth and waved his mechanical hand in an arc. A swirling circle of glowing runes shimmered around his body and manifested around each of his warjacks as he seized them and affixed their metal feet to the decks. His boots gripped the wood as if it were planted there, and runes of power swept through the hull, as well as strengthening the beams and closing latches. As his teeth rattled from the bone-gripping impact, this measure prevented the mariners on the deck from tumbling off into the jarring lurch, prompted by the Archimedes colliding into their stern. A large exhaust piping bent and crumpled as the wood flew from the rear section. Soon thereafter, his guns tore open the enemy ship, and shouts went up from the men. Despite the effectiveness of the broadside, Montador had his hands full as revenants took to the deck. Pistols rang out from both sides. Green glowing rounds of necrotite poisoned ammunition zipped past the air to tear apart the living and dead flesh. Montador had the presence of mind to yell to one of his nearby officers, "For the love of Mauro, someone let Bradigan out of the brig!" The soldier shouted an affirmation and ran below. A harrower climbed over the ratings, sweeping a slicing claw through several of the nearest sea dogs, and aimed its glowing cannon directly at Montador. This did not worry him, given the number of people brawling in the space between him and the hellish construct, until with a grating shriek the weapon fired, and the luminous shot shrieked straight through everything between them and into Montador's side. The explosion burned his flesh and knocked several of his men to the planks. His armor's power field took the edge of the impact, but it was a painful wound all the same.
Clear the way!
Montador yelled in a booming voice. He raised red tide and charged across the blood-slicked deck. He clove into a revenant, locking blades with one of his senior members, strode towards to decapitate a second with a brutal back sweep, and then stepped up to the harrower. He shattered the armored plating with its clawed arm, broke through its joint as a man might crack a crab's leg for supper, and called a nearby mariner to his aid. It leveraged its weight into the Crixian helljack to send it flying over the deck and into the waves. Mondor leaned for a moment against the railing to catch his breath and inspect the bleeding side and burning jacket. He looked up to see the surprising sight of none other than Creeb Killingsworth, coming towards him with sharpened knives in hand. Chomping on a cigar, the man paused to sink his cleaver deep into the skull of a nearby reverend before approaching the warcaster.
Let me check that. Where in Hurricane did you come from?
Too surprised at seeing the Talon's cook to protest, the captain just watched as Doc began to inspect Montador's injuries. The sight of Dirty Meg fighting alongside his freebooters, however, distracted him as she directed it to hurl a nearby revenant quartermaster off the deck.
Meg! Get the hell out of here! I need you below! Let us handle this!
She glared back and thought that she might stubbornly disobey, but after giving him a rude gesture, she and her jack made her way to the aft stairs. A large knot of revenants backed away, having seized the section of the deck to make their stand. Before Montador could even deal with a lot of them, a bare-chested maniac burst onto them in the midst from behind. The warcaster smiled as he saw bloody Bradigan, armed with nothing but his fists and a broken bottle, tear into the undead. He hurled revenants out of his way and leapt upon the nearest quartermaster. Bradigan drug him to the deck before tearing off great chunks of rotted flesh with the bottle. Meg slipped past them to the stairway. Montador pushed Doc away.
Go help someone worse off than me. There are dead things that need killing.
The Talon's defenders might have quickly swept aside the Revenant boarders if not for their habit of rising again. Shay had fought Revenants before and knew how to prioritize eliminating their officers, but he found it more difficult in execution than in theory. He chased after them to the nearest Revenant quartermaster, who had made a tactical retreat towards the aft rail while firing his pistol. When a sudden bullet from above cut short Shay's pursuit by tearing off the Revenant's head. Shay turned to salute the rifleman he presumed had landed the killing blow, but saw instead Master Holt standing on top of the poop deck. Shay gave the man a bemused salute, but the distraction almost killed him. Shay blinked as the stranger raised his pistol over his left hand and aimed towards the warcaster. The bullet flew over Shay's shoulder, close enough that he felt its passage, and cut down a revenant charging at his back with a heavy cutlass. By concentrating, Shay could now spot the indistinct form of Lady Ayana near the pistolier. She focused on the revenants by chanting syllables in an exotic but melodic tongue as her hands glowed with power. She had no time to ponder what he witnessed, and he turned back to the fight. The next time he looked for the pair, they were gone. Shouts of dismay and the sight of his terrified men pointing made him put that mystery of the duo aside. Arriving at the rails, he saw the Ultraminus, sinking moments before, had somehow reversed that motion. Its lopsided deck leveled to a creaking and groaning as charred timbers reformed before the warcaster's eyes. One of the broken masts righted itself, and its green-fired sails returned. Water, pumped by some unforeseen agency, poured out of the holes along the lower hull before the holes closed themselves. A voice spoke in his ear. The Atromenius cannot be killed that easily. He turned to see Fiona, who had forgotten amidst the chaos. That ship will persist so long as its captain and Rengrave cannot be killed as the ship endures. She smiled as if this paradox pleased her. Turok is clever. Wouldn't you agree, Phineas? Shay ignored her for the moment and watched the ominous recovering ghost ship. He shouted to the top of his lungs, "Full sail! Full stoke!" The order broke the crew out of their trance and onto the burst of motion. The Talon swept forward with renewed speed as the recovering Durgmast ship turned to follow. Shay gripped the rails. "Come on and give me speed." He slumped as he wondered if they had pushed their luck a bit too far. He stood straighter and put on a good face for the crew. He looked up to catch Hawk's eye as she kicked revenant bodies into the water. He joined her and leaned forward to speak within her ear. "We have stowaways." She didn't seem surprised and gave him only a curt nod. "Stay sharp, but don't get jumpy. They helped me in the fight, so I'm inclined to give them some slack." The Talon quickly outpaced the Calamitous, heading into the open water despite unfavorable winds. Steam engines possess the power to push the ship into a good speed fairly quickly. The other ships pursued the Archimedes and now appeared, and both Shay and Grogspar identified them as most likely the remnants of the Signaran Navy vessels that had earlier left the cove. They seemed too far away to concern, but closed gradually. The obvious trouble with the Calamitous' engines, or paddle wheels, stemmed from a more pressing issue. The ill fortune in the Stiletto lingered back, circling their flagship. Fiona stood at the stern of the Talon and stared silently. Mr. Walls appeared after her. Mr. Walls approached her after her men quickly finished scrapping the undead off the decks and gave her a paternal smile.
"Longing for your ship, lass."
She glared at him with a cold stare as if weighing the merits of burning him alive. Mr. Walls took a step back. "I'm calculating the odds of our survival, and I judge them poor. The Archimedes will come for us once it deals with Montador." Captain Shay peered at the other approaching vessels. "Well, the Signaran Navy might lend a hand. Looks as though that elf was right. They left us to chase Crixians." Fiona smiled and pointed at the thick plume of smoke rising from one of them. Where 3 had left, 2 had come limping back. "It doesn't appear it went well for them. The Archimedes rarely sails alone. I expect the Navy tangled with a smaller group of ghost ships while Rengrave pressed ahead for the real prize." Tension tightened Shay's frame as he examined the situation. "The Calamitous isn't getting up to speed. They aren't going to make it." Fiona turned her cold eyes on him. "I don't know if we're going to make it. The Archimedes is faster than we are." "I'm not too sure about that." Shay sounded defensive. "She's a big ship. We can sail better close. We can sail better close hauled into the wind. The Archimedes needs neither wind nor fuel. Its crew suffers not hunger, thirst, or fatigue." Fiona explained as if speaking to a child. "You cannot outrun her. Tell me you're not seriously considering going to help the Calamitous." Shay broadened. "I thought Montador was your partner. And what of the ill fortune?" The redhead sorceress shrugged dismissively. "I can always find another partner," she said and gave him a significant look. "Or another ship. Turning around would be suicide." Shay nodded as if in agreement and then turned to Bosun Grogspar. "Bring us back to the Calamitous. Keep the engines at full and watch the sails. Prepare to tack." He noticed several of the crewmen nearby, including Hawk, eyeing him strangely. He offered unconvincingly, "Doc's stuck back on the ship. We can't just leave him." They looked at him with clear disbelief, but no one said a word of protest. Shay followed his own odd moral compass, and the crew had long since learned never to question it. Fiona stepped close to him. Her eyes conveyed some breed of cruel humor. "This is a mistake. Do not force me to take your ship from you." He found it difficult to discern if she was earnest, but a hungry edge lurked in her voice, for which Shay did not care for. He remembered the look that she shared with Montador. "You can try. he suggested, smiling back and giving a significant look behind her. Fiona turned to follow his eyes and saw Hawk standing tense and ready, her hands on her hilts. But if you commit, make sure you can finish what you start. He pushed past Fiona without giving her another look. On board the Calamitous, Megan Melrose stood with her hips stood up to her hips in wooden debris, grease, and broken metal leveraging her wrench against a tightly wedged connection, while subordinate engineers and any sea dogs she could enlist hammered or sawed at her orders. "Get something wedged up underneath that!" she shouted and pointed where one of the set of pipes had sagged dangerously and threatened to break loose. An Orgrin crewmate managed to leave his bulk under it, pressed upwards and yelled as the hot metal cinched his hands. "Oh, you big baby, here!" She crammed a broken beam under the pipes. The Orgrin let go and inspected his blistering palms. She went back to work on the broken connection between the crankshaft and a series of oversized gears with interlocking teeth large enough to chew a man apart. One of the mates yelled down, "Meg, we need this working now. They're closing in on us. How long? If we can't turn to fire, we're done for." "Tell them not to engage the rear wheel. Compensate with the secondary paddles." She despaired at the thought of her shouted instructions changing as they passed from one officer to another through the enormous ship. "He's gonna engage that thing and get me killed. I just know it," she muttered. She grabbed another tool and jumped up between the drive shafts. Meg had nearly a heart attack when she felt the ship lurch, but she relaxed as she identified it as a complaint of the outer engines pushing past their limits. Thanks Cyrus for small miracles." The Talon came about, and with the wind now in their favor, made good speed in the opposite direction. The Archimedes had not yet entirely fully recovered from its earlier pummeling, but it nonetheless creeped inexorably towards the Calamitous, still struggling to make speed. The two Signaran Navy ships moved to intercept, and the ghost ship took a moment to turn and deal with them. The flame of its cannons fired flash from both sides. Their engagement created the perfect opportunity for the Talon to escape, if Shay had so inclined. Shay's eyes remained alert for any trace of his stowaways. The crew's upper deck had only a few places they could stand without someone walking into them, and he eventually spotted a shimmering high up on the poop deck. He went there and spoke quietly to the air. "Would these Signarans have anything to do with the pair of you?" There followed a pause before an accented female voice responded. "There is a distinct possibility of that, yes. I strongly suggest that you hasten to the other direction." That seems to be the prevailing opinion," Shay noted sardically. "I imagine there's some interesting stories behind why the Makarian League had you prisoner, why the Signaran Navy was helping, and why the Cricks are coming for you now." "Yes. We do not have time to indulge them right now." "Fair enough. If we live through this, I'll need some answers." He did not wait for a reply, but walked to where his men were hooking a freebooter to the crane. Hawk and Fiona approached with similar scowls as he found it difficult not to laugh. Hawk looked ready to murder him, so he restrained the impulse. "What in blazes do you think you're doing?" she demanded. "I'm going to go take care of the Archimedes." "I'm not going to let you kill yourself," Hawk insisted. "I have no intention of killing myself. I need you to look after the ship until I get back." He gave a significant look to Fiona, who he addressed in turn. "You, on the other hand, I need you to kill anything that moves that doesn't look like me." He glanced at the ghost ship, which had turned to target one of the approaching Signaran vessels. Its previously quiet cannons had erupted to life, and the smallest ship soon floundered as its sails collapsed. From this distance, the cannons sounded like cracking thunder. As the Talon made its approach, the upper decks of the Calamitous didn't stay idle. Sea dogs fired whatever cannons they could directly at the ghost ship. The large privateer ship stood at its weakest firing point with the Archimedes directly astern, only be able to bring in a few of its weapons to bear. The ill fortune fared a bit better, but it got too close until it got too close to the Revenant ship, which at this point boarders overran it. Smoke and fire from the smaller ship indicated the fight was going poorly. The port side of the undead vessel, obliterated not too long ago, looked nearly restored, and the ghost ship quickly picked up speed. Shay had the tremendous Commodore up front alongside his mariners, ready on the starboard. Shoot for the decks and clear the way. Grape shot, chain shot, whatever we have left. You'll get boarders, so be ready to repel them. He nodded to Hawk, who looked away with a frown and turned to lead the men. Quartermaster Walls offered a casual salute and drew pistols. Shay turned to Bosun Groxbar. Trail out the rope. Lot of rope. Rockbottom stood up near with Fire Breather rested on his hip. Shay gave him a quick look and then grabbed the cable line from the crane, standing on the toes of the hulking freebooter. Raise it up! The crane borrowed power from the ship's engines to pull him into the air, swaying in the wind. They closed quickly on the Alcheminus. Its decks swarmed with the dead and ghastly green fires. Fire! Shay bellowed, and the Talon's decks erupted in explosions. Cannonball, incendiary shots, grape shot, rifle and pistol fire raked across the deck and tore revenants apart. As the result of this brief moment of relative peace, the Talon's crane arm swept the freebooter and Shay in a wide arc. Shay slashed upward with Squall and several of the cables as they hit the outer edges of their arc. He pushed off and tumbled away from the falling Jack before they both hit the charred deck. Despite the roll, the impact from the long, hard fall had knocked the wind out of Shay's lungs, and he nearly lost his sword as he rolled just inches from the flickering lick of unnaturally green fire. With another roll, he narrowly evaded a revenant cutlass descending towards his head. The freebooter managed to keep its feet and pulled itself loose from the exploding deck boards before turning to bat aside nearby revenants. Leaping to his feet, Shay caught sight of his target just up the firelit backstairs of the great wheel of the ship. Saber in hand, he sliced his way through several revenants as the freebooter charged alongside him. The air, choked and hot, caused him to painfully cough, and his vision blurred as his eyes watered. Ahead of him stood Captain Rengrave, the dread lord of this dread ship. A dead crow perched on his shoulder with cold, gleaming eyes. Rengrave laughed at the sight of Shay, and his crew joined in the mockery with a shrill caw. The revenant captain raised his own pistol and fired, but Shay twisted to the side and the bullet grazed past him.
Kill me, fool.
Rengrave's ghostly voice came across the decks, clearly despite the chaos and the noise. Green fires lit deep within the revenant's eyes, blazed with the promise of eternal torment and centuries of slaughter. Countless revenants closed in around them with renewed strength as if the initial cannon volley had never taken place. I don't mean to. The revenants in Shay's path erupted suddenly with purple and black flames. It was a gift from Fiona at the rails of the Talon as it swept past. Swirling runes of power surrounded Shay and his freebooter as he summoned a burst of arcane speed. He charged forward, but turned to attack at the last second. He used Squall to block Rengrave's cutlass, then barreled into the revenant captain and carried him over the rails. The freebooter's gears ground as its jury-rigged engines pushed the machine past its normal limits to follow them. Rengrave and Shay plunged into the waters, and the freebooter crashed in just above their heads. The Jack, sinking quickly through the water, reached out to clamp onto Rengrave's chest and gripping him tightly. The undead pirate managed one good swipe at Shay's left arm that opened a deep gash before he sank out of reach. At Shay's mental command, the Jack released its valves, which normally protected its heart fires, and extinguished its engine as it disappeared into the depths, with Rengrave locked in its grip. The power field emitting from Shay's armor had been specifically engineered and customized to provide buoyancy, and this allowed him to swim quickly to the surface. He swam as fast as he could as he could after the Talon's wake, alarmed as he spotted the end of the trailing rope. His groping hand narrowly reached for it before the final knot slipped past. He let it pull him away as the necrotite shot splashed out of the water around him. He looked back up to see his ploy had worked. The Atramenus gave up the chase and slowly started to stand dead in the water. A Leviathan tumbled into the ocean, clearly sent overboard to recover its master. Shay hoped the recovery would take a long time. As the Sea Dogs reeled Captain Shay in, the Talon executed a fast leaning turn and headed towards open water. It seemed their gamble had brought the Calamitous the time required to repair its paddle wheel, and it rapidly gained momentum. Shortly thereafter came the thundering boom of cannons, and he turned to see that the last remaining Signaran Navy vessel bearing down on the ghost ship. For the first time in recent memory, Shay felt grateful for the sight of the blue and gold Signaris. As the Calamitous maneuvered behind the Talon, the Signaran vessel moved to face this new foe. A cheer went up from the decks of the pirate crews as a very wet and disheveled Captain Phineas Shay came back on board. Shay saw Hawk looking irate and standing very near Fiona. Hawk had one of her swords drawn, and the tip was dug into the deck planks while the first mate curled her fingers around the loose pommel. "So anything untoward happened while I was gone?" Shay asked casually. "Caught one of the ill-fortune's mates whittling with a large knife rather close to your rope line." Fiona shrugged with a smirk. "Can't blame a woman for trying. This is really a fine ship, Captain Shay." She once again ran her hands along the nearest rail. Shay took this evidence of treachery calmly. "I think I know why Montador prefers to loan you a ship rather than provide you a berth on the Calamitous." Fiona's hurt expression lacked sincerity. Men are such suspicious creatures." They pushed an extra day and night at full speed, heedless of the coal consumed, before finally breathing easier and taking a moment to stop and getting the crew in order. Despite considerable losses, the ill fortune managed to limp away and rejoin them. Fiona seemed almost reluctant to return to her own vessel, although her departure relieved many of the Talon's crew, not least of which Captain Shay. Hawk decidedly unfriendly demeanor improved once the Thamorite departed, but the swordswoman refused to speak about it. Doc Killingsworth returned without fanfare to some quiet grousing amongst the crew, but never to his face. The man who had the run of the galley in his absence went missing a few days later, and no one was brave enough to discuss his fate except the note that he might have moved things around in a fashion displeasing to Killingsworth. They finally persuaded their newest passengers to stop invisibly lurking around. Grogspar seemed eager to take them to the brig and beat some answers out of them, but Shay refused. The captain cornered the duo personally when the opportunity presented itself. "Is this somewhere we should be dropping you off at?" Ayana and Holt shared a look from which Captain Shay judged that the outcome was of some earlier debate or decision regarding this topic did not entirely please the pistolier. Ayana measured her words as she spoke. "Actually, Captain Shay, I had hoped to entreat upon you to allow us to remain here. For my particular studies, I need to stay in this region, and it would be better if I kept in motion. I think the Talon would be ideal." "We're not a passenger ship, lady. Everyone here earns their way. I have to know I can count on everyone on board when battle is joined. It also occurs to me that carrying you two might be inviting a whole new type of trouble. You've seen that we can hold our own in a fight, Captain. I assure you that we do not mean to stand idle. It may take time for you to come to see it, but you'll be getting the better part of this bargain. We require no shares. You will not find a better shot than Master Holt." She touched his arm. "And I bring a few useful skills of my own. Do you know of another pirate captain who can claim access to the arcane lore of Ios?" Shay appraised the pair of them with a seasoned eye. It began to dawn on him that perhaps he may not come away from this Macarian League fortress empty-handed after all. Before the ships went their separate ways, Mondador caused a commotion when he forced his way aboard. Red in the face and yelling threats, he remained convinced that the Talon had cut him out of the share of the treasure haul that they must have found in the fortress, heedless of the fact that Fiona had corroborated the story. Shay demonstrated surprising restraint in humoring the blustering warcaster. He let Mondador search the holds until he conceded that Shay had no hidden stash. Shay sensed a certain tension as Mondador departed, and the Talon's captain had gotten a feeling that the long-bearded Tordoran was weighing the merits of collecting a certain lucrative Macarian League bounty. Palpable relief settled over the crew as the Great Calamitous broke to sail to some unknown destination. Rockbottom acted more furtively and secretive than usual until a few days later he came to Shay bearing a leather-bound book. His eyes had a gleam that concerned Shay. "I decided to forgive you for throwing away that freebooter despite the woeful state of our treasury," Rockbottom began with a regal wave of the hand. "Very magnanimous of you. What is the occasion of this charitable gesture?" Shay queried as he poured the dwarf a glass of wine. "The occasion is that I seem to have acquired something of value from our little expedition after all." He tapped the books proudly before seizing the offered glass and taking a hearty swallow. "Quality literature?" Shay asked. "These, my good friends, are routers, showing certain Macarian League trade routes in exacting detail, including, but not limited to, a set of notes explaining what might be a safe passage to the hereafter inaccessible and largely untapped southern continent of Zoo." As oblivious as he tried to stay in nautical concerns, Shay had sailed long enough for the routers to impress him. "Those are priceless. Priceless things are worthless things. I guarantee you that these have a price." The dwarf looked smug, and a ruddy glow colored his cheeks. "If there is one treasure more than any other that the Macarian League has endeavored to keep to itself," he tapped the cover, "it is this." He lifted his wine glass. "To vengeance!" he proclaimed as he drained the contents of the glass. "Retribution is at hand!" With these ominous words, the dwarf and his peg legs stumped out of the captain's quarters. The pirate captain watched him go. "Should I be glad or afraid?" Shay finally asked. After a moment's pause with no reply forthcoming, he shouted to the dwarf retreating back, "We are not sailing to Zoo. Do you hear me?" And that, my friends, is the end of that tale. Woo! It was a long one. But yeah, we got all this plays into the lore. We finally figured out how and why Lady Ayana and Master Holt joined up with the Talon's crew. And now we do know that the crew now has set their sights on Zoo. For those of you who don't know, Zoo is a large continent about to the south of Emerald, the main continent of the story. They have a few places about Zoo. I mean, there have been some expeditions to Zoo, but it remains largely unexplored. The culture seems, based on what little we know about Zoo, is very Arabic, if that's a word for it, but mostly very little about Zoo has been ever explored. I mean, to show you just how good it is, how interesting it is, you know Mr. Walls' pet monkey, Stubbs, he's from Zoo. So yeah, there's quite a number of things happening with Zoo right now, and in fact there's something going on in the lore that heavily concerns Zoo, especially after the big apocalyptic event that was the Claiming. But yeah, crazy stuff. It's been a long time since I actually did some live reading, but there we go. And with that, I think we're just gonna end it right here. But yeah, thanks for everyone who came in and decided to take a listen. I'm gonna thank LPH, Hairball, Devil, and of course Pugsy for dropping in. If you were listening in from Blue Sky, I appreciate that. If you want to listen on the VOD, I will make sure to have timestamps below so that you can get to the parts that you want to enjoy. And hopefully we can do this again with another story from Warmachine. I think there's actually a small short story in one of the books where it details the somewhat origin of the doctor slash cook of the Talon, Doc Killingsworth, and how he got his name. Yeah, it's a pretty interesting story. I actually read it once, but I think I'll read that next. There's a story called Destiny of a Bullet that details a hit done by a mercenary sniper named Kale Belloc. Yeah, there are a lot of great stories in this one. So hopefully we'll be able to read some more of those too, and maybe even read a couple of the books. Yeah, there are a lot of books, not as many as Warhammer, but there's still enough books that you can get, that you can really sink your teeth into this world. I'm glad that you guys are interested in this world, because Warmachine needs more representation on YouTube, far beyond bat reports and model paintings, but just digging into the lore. And I'm glad that you guys are enjoying this. So I'm glad for all 4 of you who've been watching, and anyone else who might be listening. So until next time, it's been Shintigercurl, that dude in the straw hat, saying good night, and we are not going to zoo.